let's take us into American home, and there's the white family, and they're pretty split over what just happened here. I mean, forget Trump. What just happened here for on American soil that the whole world is looking at us as an embarrassment. When that conversation comes up, give us the tools. What can we do to snap into it so we don't?
Right. So, so the first thing you have to do, well, is to say, okay, we're going to start out. We're trying to find our agreement and then expand the zone of agreement, right? So the good news in this case is that, I mean, it's so horrible that the way Mr. Floyd was killed, but from a dialogue standpoint, the reason it's useful is because we can all agree that that was bad. Like in a bunch of other these killings, even when people getting shot in the back, even when, I mean, they're egregious in various ways, often we couldn't even agree that that was that was bad. Like, and so what's unique about this and represents opportunity, I mean, when you have Sean Hannity saying this was a bad cop killing,
yeah,
you know it's bad, right?
Yeah. Because, because the old narrative has been, oh, well, that black guy must have done something. He must have done something.
Or the cop's under stress, or he feared for his life. I mean,
this is just the way it is. Hey, another one bites the dust. I mean, pretty much.
Right. Well, there's an empathy problem there's underlying all this. That's what that one's involved. But
silence is violence.
The bigger one, I think, is more commonly is, I understand where the cop was coming from because he feared for his life, or the guy must have done something wrong. Here, in this case, those don't work. So what I'm saying is that you can start from, wasn't that awful? And you can also agree, I mean, that even though people weigh the negative implication of the violent protests differently versus the actual violence, even, Killer Mike, these black mayors, these black leaders, they all don't like this violence. So you start out by agreeing that not only was the death bad, but the violent protests were bad. If you're a progressive person, you might want to first talk about how the violent protests made the conservative person feel, because part of, and don't but it. Like part of what people do is like, they might ask you how you feel, but but. And I think that strategy doesn't help you build trust or expand the zone of agreement.
So stop walking in with your own argument ready to go.
Right.
Relax a minute.
Ask questions and try to find, like I teach people, one thing to remember from a persuasion standpoint is the ABC, agreement before challenges. Like if you're trying to really influence somebody, what you want to do is to find as much agreement as you can before you try to challenge their view, right?
I like that. That's a good one.
Right? So that's important to do. So you can agree that the violent protests were bad. You can agree that the killing itself was bad. Mm-hmm. Okay? Then you can start talking about, okay, the nonviolent protests, let's talk about them for a second. Because of course the vast majority of these protests are nonviolent, even though what gets on the news makes better TV is the violent protests. But the vast majority are nonviolent. And let's remember, a whole bunch of these violent protesters are white folks who've come in to
agitators.
And either from the far right or the far left, and some of those people are actual professional thieves. Like a part of that's a whole other thing taking place in this. Like part of what goes on is you got professional thieves coming in to take advantage of the looting and the violence that perhaps the agitators are doing.
And you know what? I will say this: I was happy to see that the news did work very hard to differentiate those groups. Now, I don't agree with looting either or burning anything, but a protest is a protest, and both got the attention. Sadly, it had to go there, but yeah, people are that's the first thing they're going to say is they're going to point to, well, now look at those looters and try to start this racial firebomb, gaslighting the situation.
Right. So you've established that the thing was the violence were wrong and the killing was wrong. So then, okay, let's talk about the peaceful protesters. And then, I think part of what people don't do is to ask a person who's not inclined to be aligned with them and say, well, why do you think that they're doing that? Like to get them to do a perspective taking exercise. That's a useful conflict resolution and persuasion tool to get the person that you're disagreeing with to, like in by way of invitation, what do you think is going on with these other people? Now, notice.
Yeah, it diffuses the momentum of see them, look at them, look at them. And instead of going, well, they're doing it because they're angry, why don't you ask, why do you think they're doing that? And it really does change the energy of the whole situation. You're right.
They don't have much of a problem with. Like the peaceful protesters, they're not gonna have as much of a problem with. So you start with what do you think's going on with them, right?
What you agree upon, yeah.
Right. Well, you start the agreement, and then like, what do you? These people protesters, peaceful protesters in the American tradition. Why do you think these people are protesting? So you can have that conversation. Now, that there's a couple of footholds in that conversation too, and that is like, have you ever felt mistreated by an institution? Like even your typical white person who has probably had some situation in their life, if they're over 30, where they felt an institution treated them poorly and were frustrated. So that's one toehold. If after the other conversation, what do you think's going on with them? Another toehold is, have you ever done anything out of frustration that ultimately undermined yourself? Like to part of, again, you're trying to build bridges of empathy, right? Because most people have done that, although they're all like, I don't know, why did people burn down their own community? And they don't remember that they have done things out of frustration that hurt themselves.
Oh, you've thrown a shoe.
There you go. So my point is that, notice there's a sequence that I'm describing, right? You're approaching the conversation with some strategy. Start out with agreement, ask a question, have them do a perspective taking, give them some reminders, or ask questions about experiences that they may have had. Like and if they don't have it, then maybe you have it. Maybe you have done something that you regretted. So you show that you have empathy for some people, not because of their position, but because you've done something like that. Well, then I would suggest that later, the third phase is like to probe the issue of racism. Now, this conversation might not happen in one conversation, right? Part of what you're trying to do from a bridge building standpoint is to have a conversation where you get to be yourself, and the other person who disagrees with you leaves it saying, "I wouldn't mind talking about this with them later." Right? Because part of what happens is that people are so obnoxious with each other that they don't want to talk, that they have such a bad experience, they don't want to talk about it anymore. And
I know.
That silence keeps racism in place. Just to finish that whole thing out. So you put off a discussion about what is the level of racism that happens until a couple stages down in the conversation. And then you say, okay, well, let's go find out about that, right? And again, that's why this might last more than one conversation. So, there's a history of these kind of incidents in Minneapolis. That can be we all have the Google machine on our phone. There's a history of these situations in wherever city you're in, and there's research about how people of color are treated. So notice you're doing all of that before you get to the thorny question of what might we do? What should we do about the level of racism that happens? What should we do when people who believe in violent protests mix in with people who believe in nonviolent? You want to wait for that conversation until you've done the other work of building trust, of doing perspective taking, and then of trying to get some information we can both agree about the nature of racism that impacts that moral question. Mm-hmm. People want to go, probably what happens is people want to go right to the moral question, and they got whole different senses of, like, what's the information about the level of racism. They don't have any agreement and therefore trust.
Well, so, I like that. That's a great takeaway. The ABC, ask before challenging, and I also what is it?
Agreement before challenging.
Well, say what?
Agreement before.
Oh, agreement. Oh, okay. But agreement before challenging. Okay, but I think what I was tapping into was the exchange, the asking of, you tell me your story, let me share mine. That to me is so important. I believe that storytelling is what's going to save the day, and that's what's going to create the empathy. And I love the agreement and exchange of ideas, and finding what I usually call the least common denominator. When I'm trying to tell a journalistic story and sell it to the masses, I always try to find that least common denominator in humanity. We all want our bellies full, our babies fed, our houses warm. Let's start with the humanity, and then
that's right. So basically, you got. It's funny, you got the other thing right. Like the method I teach of having conversations about racial issues is called the race method.
I love this part. Tell them this one. This is my favorite one. Every time you tell this story, and milk it because it's great.